On the topic of the sage cats of Atlantis, I wish to begin by reading to you from an article I wrote in 1996. But I want to fill it out. I want to go further with it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'll start with the written material, and then I'm just going to talk about it and bring us further into that world at that time as I see it in the Akasha. While it was not possible for me to find or create images that truly express the scenes, the animals, the creatures that I'm seeing in the Akasha, I put together some images that imbue that quality of it, that allow you to flow with the feeling of what it was like in those temples in the ancient days. The young woman sat very still on the polished stone floor of the temple chamber. She closed her eyes and began the now familiar ritual of placing herself in a semi-trance state and summoning the Rutami to mind link with her. After a few moments, she opened her eyes once again and saw the Rutami come forth from the depths of the temple, their forms gracefully surrendering to light and shadow as they glided toward her in padded silence. Alana smiled her best cat smile, and the creatures returned the gesture. The cat people looked not much different from our current domestic breeds, but their psychic powers were far more developed. Atlantis' holy isle of Ruta, containing the temple in which Alana now sat, was named after the Rutami. For centuries before the Hyperboreans came to Atlantis, it had been maintained solely for the raising and breeding of temple cats. The larger cats, such as lions, tigers, and leopards, were called the Rutasi. They too were included in temple work and had their own temple named after them. I will be discussing the Rutasi just a little later on in this video. Alana was a true Rutan priestess with mixed Hyperborean Atlantean blood, as was characteristic of the Rutan people. The Hyperboreans had naturally been drawn to the Isle of the Cat, since within the domain of their home star Sirius, some of their kind had morphed into lion-like beings. Thus, with her genetic link to the feline ones, Alana was able to easily move into communion with the Rutami. Parsi, the cat with golden eyes and long silver gold fur, was the lead Rutami who always began the mind song with her. The other 6 cats, one by one, joined in. Alana's whole being was filled with the sweet rushing sound and light, a nectar bath for her soul. After the completion of the unifying song, the true work began. With the 7 Rutami, she had established a geometric energy pattern through which remote services could be performed, such as biophysical healing, the balancing of earth ley lines, and other more exotic efforts, including magnetic weaving, which was a process of redesigning the magnetic body of humans and animals. While in a synergic unity of mind with the priest or priestess, the Rutami and the Rutasi could open their biofields and expand their light bodies to accept the crystalline wave forms of the planet. The interactive priest or priestess would then direct the modulations of the planetary energy through the cats for the purpose of healing Earth energy nodes, or even creating 3D solid crystals for future energy work. For healing work on individuals, the patient would be placed in a central geometric with rutami or rutasi positioned at key points in that geometric. The cats would be telepathically instructed by the priest and priestess to integrate with the energy field of the patient in the center of the resonating field. Then the priest or priestess would conduct the manipulation of magnetic biocurrents with the patient as the cats moved their energy systems in and out of the needle's eye with the patient's magnetic field. The technique would redesign the magnetic body of the patient, overriding old patternings of illness or mental emotional blocking. The Rutami and Rutasi of Lemuria and Atlantis were hybrids as a result of genetic breeding. Different strains of them from Rigel in Orion, in Sirius in Canis Major, were blended with the lesser evolved Earth species to create the sage cats, the cats of wisdom, as they were often called. They lived an age comparable to the humans with prominent star genetics, which in the time of Alana was 450 to 500 linear years as an average. One of the most famous Rutami was a white azure-eyed male named Meropis. He lived 352 years, and during his life was the supreme sage cat on Ruta, having been seated by a Samurdi, flame being. Meropis had a following all his own from among the pilgrims to the Two Moons Temple, which was his home. Every morning after the ringing of the Petaluma, the prayer bell, Meropis would sit in great dignity and bountiful repose upon a royal blue cushion made from the down of the rare buka bird, which was an ancestor of the ostrich. The faithful would file before the aquiline pussycat with offerings of garland flowers and sacred tamni beads, asking for his reverential blessing. While such display may seem a bit misplaced to our new age of self-empowerment, it need be viewed as a pattern resonant with many Eastern religions of today who find within their gurus a path to the sacredness within themselves. Nor were all temple cats as revered in such a manner even in the ancient times. Meropis had earned his position through his extraordinary healing powers and highly evolved spiritual presence, which was enhanced by the Samurdi infusion. The demonstrations of reverence toward this Rutami were gestures of recognition to spirit manifest in the animal kingdom. Meropis was perceived as a host for the divinity within all. Meropis did have a distinct celebrity status, however, and his personality so reflected his unique talents that he was loved by many. In the temples of Lemuria and Atlantis, the Koska were often seen at the doorways, escorting the prayerful into the holy sanctum. These were similar to present-day Aussie cats, with ocelot coloring and spots. Descendants of this same breed still guardian chambers within the labyrinths beneath the sacred structures on the planet. They are maintained by the Order of the Labyrinth of the Inner Earth. On Ruta, it was not uncommon to see cat priestesses such as Alana walking through the sanctified halls of the temple with 2 or 3 sage cats draped about their shoulders and in their arms. The cat priestesses believed that the power of the feline was a path to Akashic insight and therefore could help them to decipher the codes for the healing of the soul. Often a priestess would wear a pierced earring of a certain design, which would also be displayed in the ears of the temple cats she worked with. Also, the collars of the cats carried symbols identifying their station, for these cats were embodiments of highly evolved devas who from birth had been indoctrinated with degrees of service to the temple. In the age of the great temples, the sage cats enjoyed being surrounded in gardens of floral splendor, for they were often assigned as Devic overlords of plants, especially those that flowered, sending their healing love light into the tender petals. Merapis of the garland offerings was, as it might be assumed, especially fond of flowers. He would go into the gardens and sit for hours, gazing at and communing with one particular flower that bloomed every 300 years. When the petals finally closed, Merapis became somewhat forlorn until he was given his own special painting of the plant in full bloom. Of course, Merapis, being a wise one, was not fooled by the picture, but his aesthetic senses seemed to be satisfied. The modern-day domestic cats carry light codes of the ancient Rutami cat people. It is for us, their human companions, to open the gateway of genetic memory in their being and travel back into time with them on the magic carpet of feline dreaming. That concludes the article I wrote those many years ago. So now in 2022, I'd like to go just a little bit deeper into this topic, especially in regard to the wild cats, the great cats, lions, tigers, leopards. Oh my. So let us look at these creatures in that ancient day. First of all, we need to understand that, from the perspective of evolution, the way people look at it from the Darwinian perspective. I don't want to go into this topic too deeply, but let's look at animals. We think of the evolution of those species. But in the age of Lemuria and Atlantis, these animals existed very much like we see them now. They de-evolved in certain locations and places because there were factors such as the time tsunami. That's a whole topic I'm not going to go into here. But when Atlantis finally succumbed to the depths completely, it was due to a time tsunami that was created by scientists that knew not what they did and unfortunately set things back in patterns and paths and even in genetic referencing. So, and there are other factors as well, but that's the main one that caused highly developed species of animals and plants to reverse themselves, and rather quickly. I'm just touching on these things, but from the perspective of the time in which they lived, these animals were very much like what we know them today. Of course, there were species and types that did not even survive at all, that we don't have now. Again, a much broader topic to cover perhaps in another video. Let us return to the wild cats, the big cats that we so admire today and fear as well. But in the time of Atlantis and Lemuria, in that ancient period, there were no animals on the planet that were savage toward human beings, at least not initially. It's important to understand that when we're looking at ages of time in which Lemuria and Atlantis existed, these were vast time periods. So a lot of things changed during that time. And in the latter part of Atlantis, things did begin to change in regard to the relationship between animals and humans. Originally, animals were not predatory or even savage in any way toward humanity because humanity treated them well. They didn't hunt them, they respected them, they indeed elevated animals in many ways. And so the respect that the animals had for humans was reciprocated. during this period of time, all were vegetarian. Now, I say all because there were pockets on the earth, on the whole of the planet, where this was not true. And those pockets were more magnetically out of balance, heavier in magnetism. This is the key to why there is the eating of flesh on the planet, is the magnetic field. It's not someone or some animal just becoming, of a lower vibration in the sense of, wanting to eat flesh. It has to do with the balancing of the magnetic current. And when the magnetic current becomes denser, in order to survive, it's often necessary, especially for animals, to eat meat. Now, human beings trailed along a little later with that, and they could have devised ways to keep from eating meat, raising the right kinds of protein. But it is a fact that, especially for people on the surface of the earth now, there are many people that just cannot simply exist without some protein from animals. It's sad but true, because of the magnetic imbalances and the individual's imbalances within them physically, But again, that's a whole other topic. I'm trying to stay focused here, but there's so many factors involved. So the animal species originally in Atlantis and earlier in Lemuria, in the early stages, were not flesh eaters, and neither were the human beings. And so that took away that predatory sense, that vampirism of, I must have your flesh in order to survive, So because of that, there was this wonderful relationship between all animals. So even the animals that weren't sitting around in the living rooms, that were out in the forests, they were not, you could probably walk up to one. Petting one was a little different because there was a respect thing going on there. And if the animal, the wild animal, did not give you permission, telepathically or whatever, to pet it, to touch it, then you didn't. Otherwise, it would be a breach of conduct, but you wouldn't get your hand snapped off. They would just probably retreat. So this was the relationship going on at the time. But back to the Rutasi, which were the temple cats of the larger species, like the lions, the tigers, the leopards. These cats in the temples were very approachable, but again, with respect. Even the smaller cats, it was a respectful communication between the human and the cat. So the Rutasi, the temple great cats, were very respected, and not more so than the smaller cats, but they had a distinct presence about them. Of course, they were big, for one thing. And you know how large cats are just so impressive. They're just amazing. And in the regard to the Rutasi, they were especially developed, like their Rutami brothers and sisters, from the star genetics, to have this presence that was almost overwhelming at times, and yet very loving and very communing with the depths of the human soul. It was especially impressive to watch the dances that the great cats did with their human priestesses and priests. The smaller cats also performed ballets, you might say, with their human partners, but when the big cats performed, it was quite impressive. So I wish to conclude this video with some imaging I created in the virtual, representing the communion between the human and the temple cats, the sage cats of Atlantis.